welcome to this week's episode of the Psyched podcast. I'm your host, Kaya Roman, and today I am so psyched to have such an incredible woman with us. I would like to welcome 1Dreah, and let me tell you about this goddess because we are really, really fortunate to get to spend some time with her. So 1Dreah, formerly known as Dr. Andrea Pennington, is an American integrative physician, a psychedelic assisted therapy facilitator, and creator of the cornerstone process for conscious evolution and the attunement meditation. She has written or contributed to 18 books. You can see some of them behind her there, and is the best-selling author of the top 10 traits of highly resilient people, the Real Self-Love Handbook, and my favorite, the Orgasm Prescription for Women.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, baby. She is also an international speaker with over 4 million views of her TED Talks and hosts the Conscious Evolution podcast, which I cannot recommend more highly. I love your podcast.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's always so good. 1Dreah developed the cornerstone process, which I'd like to hear more about. This is a proven biopsychosocial spiritual model for healing trauma and facilitating conscious evolution, which has been taught around the world in person and online. She does group-led recovery from development and intergenerational trauma and adverse childhood experiences, which, as we know, often works well with psychedelics. So we're going to hear how that got connected there. She has shared her empowering wellness advice on some little-known TV shows that you probably haven't heard of, like the Oprah Winfrey Show, the Dr. Oz Show, the Today Show, and she's been a news anchor for the Discovery Health Channel. So thank you, 1Dreah, for being such a powerful advocate and forward voice. And what's really fascinating that I want to dig into now is I know you've recently joined the executive team at Beckley Retreats, and you've been doing this work, this transformational work for a long time. But how did psychedelics get into the mix of your work? That's my first burning question for you.
Well, it actually started with altered states of consciousness, but not through psychedelics, through acupuncture.
Oh.
In the very beginning of my career, I started out as a general practitioner, family practice doc, and then I worked with my mom to create a wellness center. And one of the things we created was an intensive outpatient program for binge eating disorder using this acupuncture protocol. It's called the NADA protocol.
Oh,
and it's just 5 little needles on the ear that really help people bring harmony to body and mind. But the interesting thing is, with this protocol, people would get into an expanded state of consciousness, and they could sort of get some distance from their problems, really understand what was compulsively driving their behavior. And I recognized that if you could get people into these sort of states, it facilitated the healing process. Psychedelics came in a few years later. I had my own experiences personally, but I didn't share it professionally because you just mentioned Oprah, Today Show.
Yeah. The stigma is finally starting to break and soften, but back when you were having those experiences, it probably wasn't something you felt free to speak about.
Exactly. So I think I got really called onto the medicine path in around 2008 when I heard the call from the great mother, ayahuasca. And it's really just been over the last few years, personally, on my own healing journey. As I lost some dear friends and family members, psychedelics were really part of the grief and recovery process. And a dear friend of mine died by suicide in the pandemic. And it rocked my world. And I realized I had never shared with her all of my experiences with psychedelics.
Oh, yeah.
And for suicidality, even if we're just talking ketamine, people can go to an emergency department in the United States and get a ketamine infusion, and that cuts suicidality in the majority of people. So I realized coming out of the pandemic that I needed to open up, at least to my network and my community, about my use and my success. And then I decided to go full on with my medical practice to focus on psychedelic assisted therapy. So got the training, did the MAPS level 1.
Oh, wow.
And here we are.
Oh, incredible. So did you then incorporate psychedelics into your cornerstone process for the conscious evolution? Does that kind of fit in with, your process for helping people deal with trauma?
Absolutely. So the cornerstone process was first developed with the people who were coming through my practice. So with
Mm-hmm.
eating disorders, addiction, and trauma. And when I
Mm-hmm.
started on the sacred medicine path, which is what I call it, I noticed that some people would go on retreats or they'd get a hold of substances on their own, and then they didn't have a way to integrate and make
Mm-hmm.
sense of these, revelatory experiences. And what I noticed is as I started doing sort of integration mentoring, that the
Mm-hmm.
5 steps of this cornerstone process work really well for helping people kind of make sense of the chaos, and especially
Mm-hmm.
as they're learning to put together their lives again. So
Mm.
it's only been the last few years that I've been using it professionally for folks who are on the medicine path.
Okay. Wow. Incredible. And I'm curious, from all of your experience with people who have been dealing with binge eating, like you said, and trauma and PTSD, why do you think psychedelics are helpful in these cases?
In my experience, they help people get down to the root cause.
Hmm.
So typically when we're talking about detox or getting somebody into recovery, there is this component of
Hmm.
12 steps and talk therapy, but quite often our human psyche is very clever, and we can have
Very strong.
yeah, we can have memories walled off. There can be
Hmm.
parts of us that don't want to give up compulsive behaviors because it's been such an effective coping mechanism.
Right.
And I find that with psychedelics, when you lower those defenses, hopefully in a safe therapeutic alliance, it
Hmm.
gives people this ability to really interact with these different parts of themselves,
Yeah.
and to face the traumatic wounds that may have been contributing to those behaviors. And so
Hmm.
it's a really unique opportunity. Now, the psychedelics don't do it all by themselves. I do feel like having a therapeutic container, whether that's group therapy or one-on-one, is still really important for most of the people that I see.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And that, like you said, that integration follow up and support afterwards is so important because otherwise you might uncover some of these root causes, but then what do you do with it? How do you move forward in your life in a new way? How do you change those brain patterns that have had you stuck in those behaviors or those chronic negative thoughts or anxiety or PTSD flashbacks? You need to rewire. So
Exactly.
I am wondering, like, are you working as an integrative coach, or do you have a recommendation for people who have gone through these processes, but then are looking for that kind of integration support? What do you recommend to your clients?
Well, I do facilitate one-on-one and group integration circles. So
Mm,
I provide
wonderful.
that service to folks all around the world. In the United States, if people want to do ketamine journeys with me, I'm licensed in 3 states. So for me, I find that the group aspect is incredibly powerful. Now,
Oh,
I have a
yeah.
lot of VIPs who will say, no, 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 I just want to do one-on-one. But as
Right.
soon as they do a group setting, they
Hmm.
find that it is so powerful. And there's multiple reasons why, but two of the principal ones is when you get to hear other people as they're processing, there are
Hmm.
parts of you that will recognize and resonate with what other people are going through. And you can
Hmm.
actually get layers of your stuff unveiled just listening and tuning in empathically to other people. And then, of
Hmm.
course, that group coherence energy really fosters this safe space to do this hard work, to have the difficult conversations and to admit the things that maybe you've been ashamed of. So I
So
love
true.
doing one-on-one work, but I still urge people to really look at the group container,
Mm.
especially as we look, going forward. In order for us to scale this and to make it accessible and affordable to everyone, I think the group therapy model is going to be really important.
Yeah. And it's so true and so well said. And what I found about these group experiences is that the bonds you form with those groups are lifelong. These people become your family, and then you have this ongoing support network, which is really necessary as you are forging basically a new you. So tell me, is that kind of the model for Beckley Retreats? These are group experiences. I know very little about what happens on a Beckley retreat. Maybe you could clue us in.
Sure. So people are embarking on actually an 11-week process. So there
Wow.
is some preparatory calls and meeting folks, both the facilitation team and the other participants. And then you come into Jamaica or the Netherlands
Mm.
for a 6-day experience,
Mm-hmm.
getting 2 medicine ceremonies. And
Okay.
then there's follow-up and
Mm.
integration that we do
Mm-hmm.
online. So people really feel safe and held in this container. It's not
Mm.
like just flying somewhere, having this mind-blowing experience, and then
Right.
going back home and not having that context in that
Yeah.
container. Yeah.
Yeah. That I'm so glad that you guys are doing it that way. I'm sure, that that was built on a lot of trial and error and a lot of seeing what works and what doesn't work. And as you said, it is pretty different than the way many retreat centers are working in the world, where you go, you get your mind blasted open, and then you try to somehow figure out how to exist in the real world, the quote real world again.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's amazing. And what is your role now with Beckley?
So I'm working with the facilitation team. So I help to bring a sense of cohesiveness because we've got facilitators all over the world that fly to the different locations, and really setting the standards for us as we grow.
Mm,
We're looking to do 100 retreats, in the near future, taking hundreds of people through these experiences. And so we really want to have a standard set for our
mm,
ethics, our facilitation program, so that no matter where you go to any of these Beckley retreat properties, you have a standardized experience. And as you know, when you get into these expanded states or you're facilitating with other people, a lot of stuff can come up. And so part of my role is nurturing and developing and helping the team process
mm-hmm.
and work through these.
Mm. Incredible. Well, I'm going to ask you a little bit later how people can get information about participating in one of these retreats, because I'm sure when folks are hearing this, they're like, sign me up. So we'll find out about that. But we're talking about these macro experiences right now, some, very profound journeys with Mother Ayahuasca that you've had, these profound kind of 2 medicine ceremonies that someone would have on a journey with Beckley. But what about microdosing? That's also something that is really gaining popularity. The science is, of course, showing that whether it's psilocybin or another compound, they are working on creating this sort of ongoing state of extra neuroplasticity. I had my friends from Mycology Psychology on the podcast talking about how, they're combining microdosing with therapy. So you're creating the extra neuroplasticity, but then you're working to actually change those neural pathways with intention. And perhaps both are great. Like have your macro experiences, have your microdosing to keep you going. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on microdosing.
Yeah, I'm a believer. Personally, during the pandemic, I was in Amsterdam and decided to start a microdosing regimen with psilocybin truffles. So for me, I was able to actually track my brain waves. I happen to use a system called the Mind Mirror, which is an EEG
Ooh.
machine. So I was able to track. Now I'm a long time meditator. I do breath work,
Mm-hmm.
and I can get into that state pretty quickly. But I did notice changes as I started doing microdosing. It
Oh,
was
wow.
easier and faster for me to get in that sort of flow state. I noticed that my creativity was up, my focus and concentration. I also noticed that I was a little less edgy for things that would normally kind of like ruffle my feathers. It didn't bother
Wow.
me. And so I started exploring, talking to other folks and other clinicians. And I know that it's really polarized. Like there are people that say,
Mm.
first of all, we can't study it because no, university IRB is going to say, yes, here, you can take this medicine and go home. Like all of the research studies, they want people on site so that they can monitor.
That's a
And
tricky
so
one.
it is. So yes, it's true. We don't have this double blind placebo
Right. It's a lot of
studies.
self-reported data.
Exactly. And I personally don't think that should be discounted just because it's self-report.
Right.
I also feel like what we're starting to understand is certainly with a macro dose, we can see different brainwave changes. We know that the receptors are getting pinged. But the reality is, if you're microdosing, you're still going to be impacting the serotonin receptors. So even if you're not having this full-on hallucinogenic experience, it may be, we haven't yet verified it, but it may be that we are opening up that neuroplastic window. So I'm really keen on getting folks to do a mindfulness practice, meditation, or even EEG neurofeedback to see how they respond to microdosing. And one of the other interesting things that I've found is I think that microdosing might actually help women in menopause. So this is the next thing that I want to sort of dive into.
I've had quite a number of women ask me about this, so please tell me.
Well, yeah, when you think about some of the symptoms that women go through when they are perimenopausal or in menopause or post, from brain fog, not being able to sleep well, not being able to concentrate, and of course,
mood changes.
Yeah, the mood changes are
It's
tricky.
pretty crazy.
Yeah, and so for me, I happened to be at that age, and I didn't think about it when I was starting the microdose regimen, but in reflecting, I realized, gosh, this has made me like a better human, a better 1Dreah.
Wonderful.
So this is something I'm interested in exploring, and some of my clients have reached out to me about it, and so we're going to start tracking what happens.
Yeah. And will you track that like with a mood journal, or will you actually be taking blood tests to test hormone levels? I mean, I'm personally very curious because I'm at, same age as well. And my whole friend group, and we're getting here and we're realizing, hey, nobody told us this was going to happen.
Yeah. It's the rude awakening. Well, I'm really motivated to help people transform menopause into a sacred experience.
Yeah, exactly. This is our big transition. And I mean, it should be celebrated and enjoyed.
Exactly. Well, we don't necessarily look at blood levels changing with microdosing of hormones, but
hormone changes not so much.
We have like a 10-point scale of things for women to be tracking. So mood, energy, sleep, libido, because that should still be in there. And so there's different factors that we do check before, during, and after a cycle.
Okay. Wow. Incredible. I look forward to following that work very much. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for doing that. Do you have any, like worries about how things are unfolding? I mean, this is a new industry. It's kind of the Wild West in some ways. I think, there's a lot of great intentions. There's a lot of like, ooh, how can we make money from this? There's a lot of like confusion about what's the best way to go about legalization or decriminalization, and differences in state level and federal level. And it's a very interesting time for sure. But I mean, issues with access, affordability, so many things, synthetic compounds versus plant. I mean, so many issues. And you've really got your finger on the pulse and been involved in this for quite a while. I wonder if anything is kind of prickly for you, and any concerns that you have or hopes that you have for how things could course correct.
Well, as a woman of color, I'm still pretty frustrated that there are not more people of color that are highlighted and amplified online and at most of these conferences. There's like a small motley crew that kind of get visibility. So that's a problem. That's a problem for me because, as I was sharing with you, there are people that don't recognize that psychedelics could be part of their healthcare regimen, could really be part of their trauma healing regimen. And so until people of color are able to share freely what they're getting into, and people can see more therapists and facilitators of color, that worries me. Now, there are organizations that are out there doing great efforts. I'm grateful for the work of Chacruna. I'm grateful to MAPS for what they're doing to get more therapists of color trained. But that's one of the things that worries me. And beyond that, it's access. Whether we're talking a person of color or not, the reality is, if you were trying to do psychedelic assisted therapy, it's incredibly expensive in the way that the model is being proposed. Sure. And most people won't be able to access that, which is, again,
or attend a Beckley retreat. Pretty high price tag.
Yeah, they can be. And we have community give back programs. We also do scholarships. So I think that we're going to have more companies like ours and others that are willing to either offer scholarships or sliding scales because it's not accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is I'm a big research nerd. I happen to actually love clinical science. And I'm just a little frustrated that there aren't more research studies going on with Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Because that's another thing that can really help with the stigma. When we can start to see more people of color in the research statistics, we can feed that back to the public. So
yes, so
there are
important.
efforts being made. It's absolutely important. And yes, there are efforts being made, but these are the frustrations that I have at the moment.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for, anybody who might be listening for, say there's people that are listening that are conducting a clinical trial and they'd like to have more, representatives of the BIPOC community, they want people of color and they want Indigenous representatives, but maybe they don't know how to reach them. I don't know. Do you have any advice?
Search engines work really well for that. There aren't a lot of us out there, so you literally could do a Google search. The People of Color Psychedelic Collective is a great place to connect with people of color. Black Therapists Rock, which was founded by Deron Young. Chacruna. You can literally, if you really were a conscious business person or research person and you wanted to, there are organizations that would help. And then you could also contact folks at HBCUs, the historically Black colleges and universities around America would likely have folks in the psychiatry or their medical program that would be happy to explore ways to bring research studies.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're sharing this information. And yes, like you said, it might be super easy in a search engine, but in case people are listening who are like feverishly taking notes like I am, this is really wonderful. And it's so important. I mean, as we are developing new medicines, we're bringing them forward, we're changing laws. We need to make sure that everyone's biology, everyone's culture, everyone's needs are being taken into account as we bring these compounds forward, as we bring the methods of treatment forward. It's not a one size fits all paradigm. I really thank you for being the voice for that.
Thank you. And I want to just tap on one thing, because one of the other challenges in the field right now is a lot of people getting all in a tizzy about medicalization. I have sat in ceremony. All of my intentional use has been ceremonial, and I have the utmost respect for it. Yeah. But there are going to be people, because of their traumatic past or because of their physiology, going to some country in the jungle is not going to be feasible for them. And so while I feel like the medicalization route could lose some of that flavor, there are going to be some people that it's absolutely useful for. Yeah. So I think we have to look at both ways. And I'm grateful that there's also that possibility of, even if you wanted to do this in a clinical setting, you can still bring in ritual and honoring the lineages so that you don't lose, part of that Indigenous magic.
Yes. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So true. I mean, it's fascinating to follow the industry and see, like there's a company that I work with, Psychoceutical, that's developing psychedelics that they remove the psychedelic effect from, like with a cream that you put on the back of the neck, and it just goes to the receptors in the brain and has some really profound effects. But it's certainly not a ceremony. It's certainly not it's actually something that somebody can do at home if you're elderly, if you're even a teenager. And personally, I've sat in many sacred ceremonies as well in the jungle and around the world, and I've struggled with that as well. But ultimately, I agree with you that I think a full spectrum of all the different ways that we can tap into the healing capabilities of these incredible compounds is the way to go. And we are a diverse human population, and we need a diverse amount of ways to find healing. So yeah, I thank you for, providing all of the different ways that you are providing healing for people. So I would love to know if people want to tap into your work, whether it's to work with you, one-on-one or in your group sessions, or perhaps tap into one of the Beckley retreats. Tell us how we can get involved.
Well, you can reach out to me online. Just visit AndreaPennington.com. You'll find links to everything there. I host a Sacred Psychedelic Saturday once a month, which is a free Zoom call. Harm reduction, nothing being sold. It's just a chance to connect. And then if you are interested in Beckley Retreats, check us out online, BeckleyRetreats.com. We've got some places available for some of our upcoming retreats, and you'll see it's a really beautiful ecosystem.
Bucket list for sure. I personally would love to attend one of your retreats one day. Sounds amazing. And with Beckley, are they working, only with psilocybin? I'm curious. Is that the kind of the main compound at the moment?
Yeah, at this point, we're using psilocybin mushrooms in Jamaica and truffles in the Netherlands.
Right.
And we have our sites on a couple of other places, but yeah, it's psilocybin for the moment.
Yeah. And from your experience, working with psilocybin as well as other medicines, I mean, speaking from my experience, there's quite a big difference. I think that scientifically, there's very similar effects on the brain, but the actual experience can be very different. So are you finding, though, that psilocybin really is working to give, most people the relief, the healing, the, getting to the root of their trauma that people are looking for?
In my experience, it has been. It's been incredibly powerful, but also gentle. I mean, depending on the strain of mushrooms and how much you take, as opposed to going full on with ayahuasca or ibogaine, which are also in their own right really powerful medicines.
Yes.
But again, there are going to be some people who don't qualify either for their psychiatric history or cardiac disease or liver disease. So you kind of have to triage first based on, physiology. And again, some people find that psilocybin, it's a gentler, you can still get blasted out of your mind, but it's not quite as scary as the DMT experience for some of us. Yeah. Yes. But I find it incredibly helpful. It'll be interesting to see as research continues how it fares, how psilocybin fares for eating disorder and substance use disorder.
So fascinating.
As opposed to ayahuasca or ibogaine.
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's such a fascinating time. And like you, I'm a total research geek and I love to follow the science and all the new clinical trials and all the research that's coming out. So I'm really excited to see, what the different findings are. And I think there's just so much more research that's needed. So I really appreciate people like you who are such a, a leading voice in the medical community as well, pushing this medicine forward. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners before we wrap up?
Well, I'm just open and curious, and I would invite anyone who's exploring these compounds to really think through, like, what could this mean for you in your own life, whether you're taking the substances or not. Like, we're at what I see as a really beautiful pivot point or an inflection point. For me, one of the things that I work with clients on is something called narrative therapy. Like, we are able to change our narrative, our personal narrative, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves.
Yes.
And that's this inflection point that we're at in this so-called renaissance in psychedelics. Like, we can change the narrative about what these compounds are good for, remove the stigma, and also what they can empower us. Like, I love when I spoke to Paul Stamets at Wonderland, and hearing him talk about, like, mushrooms just make people nicer, better people. So what could this mean for us as a society? I'm not saying everyone needs to take these substances, but just looking at this as an inflection point and changing the narrative, like, what could this really mean for us?
Yeah. Woo. That's exciting to see. It's a wonderful question to be curious about. I mean, you've been on Oprah, Dr. Oz, the Today Show. Could you imagine sometime in the future speaking about this on a platform like that?
Absolutely. One of my dear friends and colleagues, Dr. Michael Dow, was just on the Today Show talking about ketamine. But, he works with Field Trip, and they have a center in Amsterdam. So it's getting out there into the atmosphere, hearing, regular mainstream doctors and therapists on TV. So it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah. Wonderful. Very exciting. Well, thank you again for taking the time to speak with us. And thank you again for your incredible work. I encourage you all to follow 1Dreah and her incredible work. And I will definitely be following along. Also, where can people listen to your podcast? If you could tell them, because I really
everywhere.
love it.
It's everywhere. It's a video podcast, so you can watch on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. It's called Conscious Evolution.
Thank you. Well, thank you for bringing about the conscious evolution, and I wish you all the best with your mission. I'm on it with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kaya. Thank you.